Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland. This video I'm going to be talking about Donald J. Trump's temperament. During the campaign, he was asked what he thought was his strongest suit in terms of becoming president. And astonishingly, he said his temperament. Well, it seemed like he had a rich sense of humour. Just staggering, when surely that's his greatest weakness, and that's really saying something. It underlined his total lack of self-awareness to claim his temperament was best for it, because he is so temperamental. Think of all the tantrums he throws, his self-obsession. I would think he's slipping back into his second childhood, but has he left the first one? So view some footage of him from the 80s and 90s, and you'll see that when he's on television, he's quite tranquil, mannerly, almost dignified, comes across as reasonable, fairly intelligent, and that was him on display mode. He could perform, he could pretend to be a decent, likeable, respectable person. But now he's lost the ability to rein himself in, and his explosive temper has come to the fore with these middle-of-the-night tweets, with raging at journalists in press conferences, things like that, with his impulsive decision-making. You see how intemperate he is. He's a highly volatile personality. So he prides himself on being plain speaking, which is why he often prefaces remarks with frankly. Again, that's a buzzword for himself. And then he wins plaudits from his adherents for his candor, for saying the things that everyone is thinking but wouldn't dare to, and so forth. He's very whimsical, and he's been indulged in the whimsy of him being a deal maker, when of course he's dreadful at deals. You look at all the deals he's ripped up, like the Paris climate deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, a few others, and then making deals which are not being honoured in the least, not even in the breach rather than the observance, the North Korean deal, which the United States assesses the North Koreans are breaking an awful lot. And even if North Korea were to still possess weapons, nuclear weapons, in a century's time, they wouldn't be in breach of the deal, because there's absolutely no indication of when they'll disarm. Anyway, so he fuels the flame of racism, which is not someone who's who's got a good temperament wouldn't do this. With his inflammatory remarks, intemperate remarks, you know, railing against immigrants, both legal and illegal, not his wife or his ex-wife necessarily, or not doing what he could to try to calm these troubled waters over Charlottesville and things of that nature, or shootings at a synagogue. So he pushes psychological buttons of his supporters on guns, on immigration, on terrorism, on jobs and trade, says they're all interconnected, and there is some connectivity between them, but saying the very things most liable to enrage them. So to redirect their anger away from him, I mean, he's ultimately responsible for what happens in the United States. I know he's not saying he's committing these crimes, but, he would try to encourage the law enforcement agencies to clamp down at them. And I know, because the federal government doesn't control the state governments, there's not much he can do in individual states. When it comes to federal issues, there is quite a lot he can do. And you see how he actually tries to use the federal government, views it as a weapon to be used to bludgeon lawful opposition into submission. So, well, Trump, he's certainly not mundane, I will say that for him. And he doesn't deal with issues he would think are quotidian beneath him. Things like education, the environment, labour law, campaign finance reform, student debt. You see, these issues, they're tedious for him, and they're not highly emotive. So that's why he doesn't do these things. And if tackling problems in those areas will do an awful lot to improve the quality of life of the average person. But no, he's not going there, because there's not an immediate emotional response. It's difficult to sloganize about these things. But he wants his supporters' blood to be boiling with indignation. When they're already fired up, they're more likely to go his way. So he makes erroneous statements on immigration about the 5,000 people in the caravan, or was it even more, of the unknown Middle Easterners, of their extensive criminal records, all of which suddenly disappeared as soon as polls closed, saying that they're so bad, all these illegal immigrants, saying that the wall was being built when it wasn't, that Mexico was going to pay for it when they've not pledged so much as a peso. So many statements made by politicians are not true with microscopic accuracy, but still broadly true, whereas Trump saw are untrue in the great majority of cases. And again, it's paradoxical that someone who is so calculatingly and horrifically offensive is so easily offended himself. Why is he so hypersensitive? He's a super touchy person. It suggests he's got a very brittle ego and he's plagued with self-doubt. Perhaps that's why he also craves affirmation. He's a fascinating study in psychology, both his own very vulnerable psychology, but the way he psychologically manipulates the cognitively limited. So he's triggered. You can see when he's furious, to be thwarted. So very touchy about things. He insults others. He derides them for their appearance, like Chris Christie or Sloppy Steve. That's Bannon, his erstwhile right-hand man, who then claimed to scarcely know. He's often making derisory remarks about others, about countries which are less economic developed, saying they are ordure whole countries, things like that. So he's risible himself in his vulgarity, his lack of knowledge, his lack of social skills, his stupidity, his lack of emotional intelligence. So he's very coarse, a dull-witted chap who then accuses others of being low IQ individuals simply because they disagree with him, without them actually being evidence of him of being dim, when his scholarly achievements are slender, to say the least. His barbs are also unimaginative. You're stupid, you're ugly, you're fat, I'm not sure what else you are. Oh, you're bleeding, or something like that. Well, there we go. So hurling jibes at others. So you couldn't say he's got a rapier-like wit. He's incompetent in his appointments as well. He doesn't do any due diligence. There's no vetting, and that's why sometimes there's a bombshell hiding in somebody's CV or resume, as Americans would say. Remember security passes, trying to secure them for close blood relatives when they hadn't been through security clearance, things like that. You know, appointing, say, Scaramucci, Hope Hicks, or whatever, people who were completely unqualified for the essential positions they were holding, just on the basis of he perceived them to be blindly loyal to him, not that they were remotely competent. And that's why a lot of people didn't last kissing time in their position. He then goes on the attack. Attack mode is perhaps where he's most comfortable. Incendiary rhetoric against others, but also against North Korea, against Iran, against no other countries I can think of right now. But he's a chicken hawk because he claimed to have, something wrong with his feet, bone spurs back in the 60s to avoid military service. Now, I would have done so too. So I doff the cap to him for avoiding serving in Vietnam. Perhaps the only respectable thing the man has done in his life. And he didn't do it for ideological reasons. Well, we shouldn't be fighting there, or we're propping up a dictatorial regime in Saigon, anything like that. No, it was completely self-interested. But he doesn't seem to have given any thought to the consequences of a war against Iran, which may well be his legacy in the second half of this first term. I think the rhetoric will crank up. There'll be more bellicose rhetoric about Iran. So to bomb their non-existent nuclear program, and the UN, the United States itself, other powers, have confirmed that the Iranians are abiding by this very stringent deal, but the United States has broken it anyway, and of course this has won them a lot of kudos from Saudi Arabia and Israel. And Saudi is against Iran, not really for anything to do with nuclear weapons. They're just a regional rival, a Shia rather than a Sunni Muslim country. And there's a power play there, a struggle for mastery in Iraq, in Yemen, elsewhere. Influence over Qatar, possibly Bahrain as well. So what do? So you bomb the Iranians extensively, and what are you going to do if that doesn't work? I mean, air raids on Saddam Hussein's Iraq didn't work. Air raids in Syria haven't worked. And, say bombing Libya, well, it brought down Gaddafi, brought to power a worse regime. Bombing in Vietnam on its own didn't work. A little bit of bombing of Cuba, the Bay of Pigs, that didn't work. So it's going to have to be an invasion, occupation, boots on the ground. For how long? For years. 17 years later, US troops are still in Afghanistan. Does the American public really need another war in the Middle East? Is that the most essential thing? Would that improve life more than anything else? Would that help the ordinary person more than, say, publicly funded healthcare? I think not. So I don't think this trick will play as well as it used to, because the American public have seen that one before. In the short term, it will give him a bit of a boost in the polls, but it won't last very long. So suppose he'll time it like a true professional to be about a month before the presidential election. As Ramsay MacDonald said, no war is at first unpopular. Of course, he needs congressional authority for that. Now, he can order airstrikes, but not a full-scale war. The Democrat-dominated House of Representatives are probably not going to buy it. There'll probably be a few war Democrats, but might not be enough. So he can at least gear up towards war, mass troops near Iran, some air raids, but not a full-scale war. The trouble is you might get one, even if you didn't want to, even if it's supposed to be an elaborate charade when the Iranians start hitting back and take a proactive approach to defense. So what else? The caravan. Well, they tried that one in April, and they did this one again before this midterm elections. So it's been the boy who cried wolf. So I don't think it'll be as successful next time when he tries to run for the presidential election. So he's a buffoon, and increasingly clownish as he's losing the plot. He certainly does not command reverence. I'm not sure even his ardent followers would say they respect him. He's laughed at by other world leaders, and rightly so, because he's just so moronic. He's very authoritarian, and such people tend to be very touchy again about slights, real or perceived. And that's another thing is, despite being authoritarian, well, probably because he's so authoritarian, he cannot accept the authority of others, and the parameters of his own authority have limits. That the FBI, the CIA, or other government agencies, they will not do exactly what he wants when he wants to abuse them for the purpose of his own aggrandizement. They won't let him encroach on their patch, that they have a mission, and if the president orders them to do something illegal, no, they're not having any of it. So he'll perform a volte-face on policy a lot, but he's dogmatic only on his anti-globalism, and that could change very rapidly too. He needs an enemy, and the globalists are one of the bogeymen he's got. But who is a globalist? I mean, told George Soros is. I'm not sure if he says he is himself. Wants an open society, more immigration. That's the thing, is people are very capitalistic. They want free trade, but not the free movement of labour. So doesn't quite go with the logic. I know people are not goods. And I realise there should be some restriction on immigration. It can be too much. Illegal immigration is a headache for the United States, as it is for many prosperous countries. But I think the whole globalist thing is a bit of a canal. Well, one of the few things that Trump is consistent about is he has no truck with human rights. You don't hear him mention that phrase at all. So I think, at least in this respect, he is authentic. He really disbelieves in that it's for each nation to do what they want, and they have absolutely no limitations, no holds barred. You can treat your people as abysmally, as cruelly, as savagely as you want, and that will not bother him one whit. So that's why he's never said a jot or a tittle about that, disapproving of barbarous actions abroad. Well, he did criticize Assad once, but without exception. So much rhetoric about human rights is hot air. People often turn Nelson's eye to abuses by their allies. But Trump believes in rights for him and his. But when anyone on his side is under investigation, it's outrageous, and it's just so grossly unfair. It's like totalitarian, although he loudly approves of totalitarianism abroad. He likes to be welcomed with circumstance, and despots tend to put on a good show. As they say, the devil has all the best tunes, which is one of the reasons why he has got this fetish for despots. He wants more pomp in the United States because he is pompous. Other presidents were self-deprecating. Obama pointed out his own failings, joked about how he was born in Africa, showing the Lion King at that Hollywood Correspondents' Dinner. Bill Clinton, in his book My Life, has said, I have shortcomings, I'm not as good as my most ardent supporters believe. George W. Bush joked about his perceived lack of intellect, things like that. You don't get any of that from Trump, who takes himself too seriously. He can't recognise his own shortcomings and his multiple errors of judgment. He really craves being loved. I think that's a weakness. He's then too easy to butter up, and Macron learned how to play him, even though they come from a completely different ideology. The word ideology is probably a bit generous in the case of Trump, but Macron astutely and definitely he sucked up to Trump. So they had a fairly good working relationship for a while. So Trump doesn't accept his limitations, so people need to know what they're bad at. I'm dreadful at loads of things. He's injudicious, and he knows zero about other lands, like the Baltics and Balkans, getting them mixed up. Quite embarrassing considering his current wife comes from the former Yugoslavia. So what a disgrace. You don't do your homework, you're speaking to these presidents of these countries, and you make such a fundamental error. It's moronic. So he's almost like the worst stereotype of an American, being obese, uninformed, conceited, a loudmouth, crassly materialistic. So obviously majority of Americans are not like that. They're stereotypes of all nationalities. They're bad people of all nationalities, and the American stereotype would be true of some people from Ireland or indeed Great Britain. So Trump is notably gloomy about meeting Democratic leaders and is truculent when he's around them, striking such a defiant attitude. Why? It's an intriguing question. He wants to put them down, publicly humiliate them. He's very confrontational, abrasive in speaking about them, making these scathing remarks about their countries, so undiplomatic right before and right after these visits, and yet he can't take it when anybody makes a reasoned criticism about his government. So there's that marked preference for tyrants. It's telling. So Trump is unintelligent, unimpressive, even in his own terms, with all the businesses that have failed, with all the billions of dollars he's lost, despite having the best possible start in life. He said he'd help fund Medicare and Medicaid. In fact, Congress cut funding with his encouragement. He said he'd build that wall, not a brick there, not a cent, voted for it even by a Republican-dominated Congress. The Muslim ban didn't even attempt to do that, only to ban most people from 7 Muslim-majority countries. Jobs brought back very few of those. Yes, there are more jobs, but not particularly in the factories that closed down in the last 10 or 20 years. So Trumpism is not about policy. Stripped of all disguise, it is merely a vehicle for his ambition. And many Republicans jumped on the bandwagon when he became their candidate, despite them rightly recognizing that in the long term, he was going to be catastrophic for the country. But not many of them are falling off the Trump juggernaut just yet, because they've long since lost their courage or their moral compass. I'm concerned that some aspects of Trumpism may survive his presidency. His sheer hucksterism is becoming normalized, that even after he's gone as president, there are others who will be able to deploy some of his tactics and reap a degree of success. But Democrats can take heart. There are green shoots. There were some encouraging signs in these midterm elections, making very substantial gains in the House, not in the Senate, falling back slightly, gaining several governorships. But there's still no reason to be complacent about 2020 for the Democrats. Remember, Trump has got peace, incumbents in prosperity. He could try to change the peace bit. I mean, assuming the economy continues on the same trajectory, it may well slow down because of his moronic tariffs, and other countries are rightly retaliating. Other thing is, of course, after 10 years after the last crash, we're due another one. And, of course, racking up the huge debt. But the demographics are moving towards the Democrats. People said that 2 years ago. Okay, the Democrats did actually win the popular vote, but they'll probably win it by a bit more next time. So the Democrats need to address, obviously, jobs, trade, and health. Practical policies. Maybe don't attack Trump, because for him I think all publicity is good publicity, but just talk about policy, how you'll help the ordinary person. And Trump may very well change his tune. Remember child separation? It was absolutely vital to national security, until all of a sudden it wasn't. So it was humane and it was crucial, as he said, but then he dropped it like a stone when it became a liability. Those kids are still separated from their parents, but we're not hearing about it. So he's spineless. Even in his own terms, he gives up very easily. So his bullocks against trade, well, the tariff things, they may come down if they're being counterproductive. If he senses that's got in between him and being re-elected, that'll go. Would that hasten his defeat? I'm not sure. If it's damaging the economy, that's bad for his chances. If he breaks his promise, that's bad for his chances. There might be a limit to how much most of his supporters can forgive him for reneging on promises. The stock market is slowing down, so there's some economic headwinds. But Trump has many tricks up his sleeve. He'll stop at nothing to win, and he's resourceful. He will jettison any promise. He'll dump any person because he's utterly unprincipled and unscrupulous. So he's very adept at lying. I don't think that will pay the same dividends for him in future as it has in the past. Probably not a dramatic shift, but I think his ability to fool people is gradually eroding. His appetite for power and fame knows no bounds, so he's fantastic at generating a media firestorm around himself. But I think people are getting used to his tricks, a little bit weary of them. I think the cure for Trumpism is to read his speeches, not listen to, because they're delivered with panache. Read them, and you'll see what utter drivel they are, how ungrammatical they are, how he simply reiterates the same talking points, and how he doesn't tell you anything worthwhile. Trump is a study in how not to reason, and US politics has been a reaction to him for over 2 years, and perhaps he won't be the main issue. It might be affordable healthcare or jobs or something like that, and he won't be able to deal with it so well. He was cunning in tapping into real grievances. You know, jobs were not paid so well. There were plenty of jobs, but the decently paid ones for the working class largely gone. Healthcare and tertiary education had skyrocketed in cost. These were major issues that are not being addressed, and I suppose a lot of working class voters in the rural states felt that politicians were talking down to them, were too pie in the sky in their ideas, too intellectual, and were contemptuous towards blue-collar people, in the Midwest in particular. So he connected there. So others are going to address those issues. Now, the opposition to affordable healthcare was read in tooth and claw among certain people, and the GOP successfully misrepresented affordable healthcare as Obamacare, never talked about substance, always scaremongered, came out with this myth that it was socialist or there were going to be death panels and things like that. So the Democrats have then got to learn how to play Trump off against their Republican base about issues like healthcare, because quite a lot of ordinary Republicans do like Medicare and do like Medicaid, but they haven't grasped that it is publicly funded. I don't know how to get through to these people. Anyway, inherent in Trumpism is pretended concern from the poor, and if that can be effectively exposed as perhaps the core lie of Trumpism, then Trumpism will implode. People might finally see through that, but there's some people who are so purblind, who are so emotionally invested in this, it is their identity, that a lot of them are not persuadable. Few others are open to persuasion. But yeah, he's running out of steam, but it would be too soon to write his political obituary. He has Fox News pulling the wool over people's eyes, but their numbers are dipping. Megyn Kelly's left. Laura Ingram's lost a lot of sponsors since her Parkland shooting remarks. Lost some viewers. Who else? Well, Toby Laren's not on there very much, and obviously O'Reilly's gone, and what's his name? Sean Hannity's making an increasingly big fool of himself as just a flagrant Trump hack. But yeah, the demographics are moving against them a bit. They've lost stars, but you know they're not finished yet. So there will be a significant broadcaster for some time to come. Their decline will probably not as abrupt enough to make a big difference in 2020. But yeah, for the Democrats, there's still everything to play for.